The Critic as Artist, Part 2, with some remarks on the importance of discussing everything, by Oscar Wilde. Persons, the same, Ernest and Gilbert. Scene, the same. The library of a house in Piccadilly, overlooking the Green Park. Ernest. The orderlands were delightful, and the Chambertin perfect. And now let us return to the point at issue. Gilbert. Ah, don't let us do that. The conversation should touch everything, but should concentrate itself on nothing. Let us talk about moral indignation, its cause and cure, a subject on which I think of writing, or about the survival of Thersites, as shown by the English comic papers, or about any topic that may turn up. Ernest. No, I want to discuss the critic and criticism. You have told me that the highest criticism deals with art, not as expressive, but as impressive purely, and is consequently both creative and independent, is in fact an art by itself, occupying the same relation to creative work that creative work does to the visible world of form and color, or the unseen world of passion and of thought. Well, now tell me, will not the critic be sometimes a real interpreter? Gilbert. Yes, the critic will be an interpreter, if he chooses. He can pass from his synthetic impression of the work of art as a whole to an analysis or exposition of the work itself, and in this lower sphere, as I hold it to be, there are many delightful things to be said and done. Yet his object will not always be to explain the work of art. He may seek rather to deepen its mystery, to raise round it and round its maker that mist of wonder which is dear both to gods and worshippers alike. Ordinary people are terribly at ease in Zion. They propose to walk arm in arm with the poets, and have a glib, ignorant way of saying, "Why should we read what is written about Shakespeare and Milton? We can read the plays and the poems. That is enough." But an appreciation of Milton is, as the late rector of Lincoln remarked once, the reward of consummate scholarship. And he who desires to understand Shakespeare truly must understand the relations in which Shakespeare stood to the Renaissance and the Reformation, to the age of Elizabeth and the age of James. He must be familiar with the history of the struggle for supremacy between the old classical forms and the new spirit of romance, between the school of Sidney and Daniel and Johnson and the school of Marlowe and Marlowe's greater son. He must know the materials that were at Shakespeare's disposal, and the method in which he used them, and the conditions of theatric presentation in the 16th and 17th century, their limitations and their opportunities for freedom, and the literary criticism of Shakespeare's day, its aims and modes and canons. He must study the English language in its progress, and blank or rhymed verse in its various developments. He must study the Greek drama and the connection between the art of the creator of the Agamemnon and the art of the creator of Macbeth. In a word, he must be able to bind Elizabethan London to Athens of Pericles, and to learn Shakespeare's true position in the history of European drama and the drama of the world. The critic will certainly be an interpreter, but he will not treat art as a riddling sphinx, whose shallow secret may be guessed and revealed by one whose feet are wounded, and who knows not his name. Rather, he will look upon art as a goddess whose mystery it is his province to intensify, and whose majesty his privilege to make more marvelous in the eyes of men. And here, Ernest, this strange thing happens. The critic will indeed be an interpreter, but he will not be an interpreter in the sense of one who simply repeats in another form a message that has been put into his lips to say. For just as it is only by contact with the art of foreign nations that the art of a country gains that individual and separate life that we call nationality, so by curious inversion, it is only by intensifying his own personality that the critic can interpret the personality and work of others. And the more strongly this personality enters into the interpretation, the more real the interpretation becomes, the more satisfying, the more convincing, and the more true. Ernest. I would have said that personality would have been a disturbing element. Gilbert. No, it is an element of revelation. If you wish to understand others, you must intensify your own individualism. Ernest. What then is the result? Gilbert. I will tell you, and perhaps I can tell you best by definite example. It seems to me that while the literary critic stands, of course, first, as having the wider range and larger vision, and nobler material, each of the arts has a critic, as it were, assigned to it. The actor is a critic of the drama. He shows the poet's work under new conditions, and by a method special to himself, he takes the written word, and action, gesture, and voice becomes the media of revelation. The singer, or the player on lute and viol, is the critic of music. The etcher of a picture robs the painting of its fair colors, but shows us by use of a new material its true color quality, its tones and values, and the relations of its masses, and so is, in his way, a critic of it. For the critic is he who exhibits to us a work of art in a form different from that of the work itself. And the employment of a new material is a critical as well as a creative element. Sculpture, too, has its critic, who may be either the carver of a gem, as he was in Greek days, or some painter like Montaigne, who sought to reproduce on canvas the beauty of plastic line and the symphonic dignity of processional bas-relief. And in the case of all these creative critics of art, it is evident that personality is an absolute essential for any real interpretation. When Rubinstein plays to us the Sonata Appassionato of Beethoven, he gives us not merely Beethoven, but also himself, and so gives us Beethoven absolutely. Beethoven reinterpreted through a rich artistic nature, and made vivid and wonderful to us by a new and intense personality. When a great actor plays Shakespeare, we have the same experience. His own individuality becomes a vital part of the interpretation. People sometimes say that actors give us their own Hamlets, and not Shakespeare's. And this fallacy, for it is a fallacy, is, I regret to say, repeated by that charming and graceful writer who has lately deserted the turmoil of literature for the peace of the House of Commons. I mean, the author of Obiter Dicta. In point of fact, there is no such thing as Shakespeare's Hamlet. If Hamlet has something of the definiteness of a work of art, he has also the obscurity that belongs to life. There are as many Hamlets as there are melancholies. Ernest. As many Hamlets as there are melancholies? Gilbert. Yes, and as art springs from personality, so it is only to personality that it can be revealed, and from the meeting of the two comes right interpretive criticism. Ernest. The critic, then, considered as the interpreter, will give no less than he receives, and lend as much as he borrows? Gilbert. He will be always showing us the work of art in some new relation to our age. He will always be reminding us that great works of art are living things, are in fact the only things that live. So much indeed will he feel this, that I am certain that as civilization progresses and we become more highly organized, the elect spirits of each age, the critical and cultured spirits, will grow less and less interested in actual life, and will seek to gain their impressions almost entirely from what art has touched. For life is terribly deficient in form, its catastrophes happen in the wrong way, and to the wrong people. There is a grotesque horror about its comedies, and its tragedies seem to culminate in farce. One is always wounded when one approaches it. Things last either too long or not long enough. Ernest. Poor life, poor human life. Are you not even touched by the tears that Roman poet tells us are part of its essence? Gilbert. Too quickly touched by them, I fear. For when one looks back upon the life that was so vivid in its emotional intensity, and filled with such fervent moments of ecstasy or of joy, it all seems to be a dream and an illusion. What are the unreal things but the passions that once burned one like fire? What are the incredible things but the things that one has faithfully believed? What are the improbable things? The things that one has done oneself. No, Ernest, life cheats us with shadows, like a puppet master. We ask it for pleasure. It gives it to us with bitterness and disappointment in its train. We come across some noble grief that we think will lend the purple dignity of tragedy to our days, but it passes away from us, and things less noble take its place. And on some gray, windy dawn, or odorous eve of silence and of silver, we find ourselves looking with callous wonder, or dull heart of stone, at the tress of gold-flecked hair that we had once so wildly worshipped and so madly kissed. Ernest. Life, then, is a failure? Gilbert. From the artistic point of view, certainly. And the chief thing that makes life a failure from this artistic point of view is the thing that lends to life its sordid security, the fact that one can never repeat exactly the same emotion. How different it is in the world of art. On a shelf of the bookcase behind you stands the Divine Comedy, and I know that if I open it at a certain place, I shall be filled with a fierce hatred of someone who has never wronged me, or stirred by a great love for someone whom I shall never see. There is no mood or passion that art cannot give us, and those of us who have discovered her secret can settle beforehand what our experiences are going to be. We can choose our day and select our hour. We can say to ourselves, "Tomorrow at dawn we shall walk with the grave Virgil through the valley of the shadow of death." And lo, the dawn finds us in the obscure wood, and the Mantuan stands by our side. We pass through the gate of the legend fatal to hope, and with pity or with joy behold the horror of another world. The hypocrites go by with their painted faces and their cowls of gilded lead. Out of the ceaseless wind that drives them, the carnal look at us, and we watch the heretic rending his flesh, and the glutton lashed by the rain. We break with withered branches from the tree in the grove of the Harpies, and each dull-hued poisonous twig bleeds with red blood before us, and cries aloud with bitter cries. Out of a horn of fire Odysseus speaks to us, and when from his sepulchre of flame the great Ghibelline rises, the pride that triumphs over the torture of that bed becomes ours for a moment. Through the dim purple air fly those who have stained the world with the beauty of their sin, and in the pit of loathsome disease, dropsy-stricken and swollen of body into the semblance of a monstrous lute, lies Adamo de Brescia, the coiner of false coin. He bids us listen to his misery. We stop, and with dry and gaping lips, he tells us how he dreams day and night of the brooks of clear water that in cool dewy channels gush down the green Castelline hills. Sinon, the false Greek of Troy, mocks at him. He smites him in the face, and they wrangle. We are fascinated with their shame, and we loiter till Virgil chides us and leads us away to that city turreted by giants, where great Nimrod blows his horn. Terrible things are in store for us, and we go to meet them in Dante's raiment and with Dante's heart. We traverse the marshes of the Styx, and Argenti swims to the boat through the slimy waves. He calls to us, and we reject him. When we hear the voice of his agony, we are glad, and Virgil praises us for the bitterness of our scorn. We tread upon the gold crystal of Cocytus, in which traders stick like straws in glass. Our foot strikes against the head of Bocca. He will not tell us his name, and we tear the hair in handfuls from the screaming skull. Alberigo prays us to break the ice upon his face, that he may weep a little. We pledge our word to him, and when he has uttered his dolorous tale, we deny the word that we have spoken, and pass from him. Such cruelty being courtesy indeed, for who more base than he who has mercy for the condemned of God? In the jaws of Lucifer we see the man who sold Christ, and in the jaws of Lucifer the men who slew Caesar. We tremble and come forth to re-behold the stars. In the land of purgation the air is freer, and the holy mountain rises into the pure light of day. There is peace for us, and for those who for a season abide in it there is some peace also, though pale from the poison of the Maremma. Madonna Pia passes before us, and Ismene, with the sorrow of earth still lingering about her, is there. Soul after soul makes us share in some repentance or some joy. He whom the mourning of his widow taught to drink the sweet wormwood of pain tells us of Nella praying in her lonely bed, and we learn from the mouth of Buonconte how a single tear may save a dying sinner from the fiend. Sordello, that noble and disdainful Lombard, eyes us from after like a couched lion. When he learns that Virgil is one of Mantua's citizens, he falls upon his neck, and when he learns that he is the singer of Rome, he falls before his feet. In that valley whose grass and flowers are fairer than cleft emerald and Indian wood, and brighter than scarlet and silver, they are singing who in the world were kings. But the lips of Rudolph of Habsburg do not move to the music of the others, and Philippe of France beats his breast, and Henry of England sits alone. On and on we go, climbing the marvelous stair, and the stars become larger than their wont, and the song of the kings grows faint, and at length we reach the 7 trees of gold and the garden of the earthly paradise. In a griffin-drawn chariot appears one whose brows are bound with olive, who is veiled in white, and mantled in green, and robed in a vesture that is colored like live fire. The ancient flame wakes within us. Our blood quickens through terrible pulses. We recognize her. It is Beatrice, the woman we have worshipped. The ice congealed about our hearts melts. Wild tears of anguish breaks from us, and we bow our forehead to the ground, for we know that we have sinned. When we have done penance and are purified and have drunk of the fountain of forgetfulness and bathed in the fountain of youth, the mistress of our soul raises us to the paradise of heaven. Out of that eternal pearl, the moon and face of Picarda Donati leans to us. Her beauty troubles us for a moment, and when, like a thing that falls through water, she passes away, we gaze after her with wistful eyes. The sweet planet of Venus is full of lovers. Cunizza, the sister of Etzeline, the lady of Sordello's heart, is there, and Folco, the passionate singer of Provence, who in sorrow for Azaleus forsook the world, and the Canaanitish harlot, whose soul was the first that Christ redeemed. Joachim of Flora stands in the sun, and in the sun Aquinas recounts the story of Saint Francis, and Bonaventure the story of Saint Dominic. Through the burning rubies of Mars, Guida approaches. He tells us of the arrow that is shot from the bow of exile, and how salt tastes the bread of another, and how steep are the stairs in the house of a stranger. In Saturn the soul sings not, and even she who guides us dare not smile. On a ladder of gold the flames rise and fall. At last we see the pageant of the mystical rose. Beatrice fixes her eyes upon the face of God, who turned them not again. The beatific vision is granted to us. We know the love that moves the sun and all the stars. Yes, we can put the earth back 600 courses and make ourselves one with the great Florentine, kneel at the same altar with him, and share his rapture and his scorn. And if we grow tired of an antique time and desire to realize our own age in all its weariness and sin, are there not books that can make us live more in a single hour than life can make us live in a score of shameful years? Close to your hand lies a little volume bound in some Nile green skin that has been powdered with gilded nenuphars and smoothed with hard ivory. It is the book that Gautier loved. It is Baudelaire's masterpiece. Open it at that sad madrigal that begins, "That you are good, what does it matter? Be sad, be beautiful," and you will find yourself worshipping sorrow as you have never worshipped joy. Pass on to the poem on the man who tortures himself. Let its subtle music steal into your brain and color your thoughts, and you will become for a moment what he was who wrote it. Nay, not for a moment only, but for many barren moonlit nights and sunless sterile days will a despair that is not your own make its dwelling within you, and the misery of another gnaw your heart away. Read the whole book. Suffer it to tell even one of its secrets to your soul, and your soul will grow eager to know more, and will feed upon poisonous honey, and seek to repent of strange crimes of which it is guiltless, and to make atonement for terrible pleasures that it has never known. And then, when you are tired of these flowers of evil, turn to the flowers that grow in the garden of Perdita, and in their dew-drenched chalices cool your fevered brow, and let their loveliness heal and restore your soul. Or wake from his forgotten tomb the sweet Syrian, Meleager, and bid the lover of Heliodora make you music. For he too has flowers in his song, red pomegranate blossoms, and irises that smell of myrrh, ringed daffodils and dark blue hyacinths, and marjoram and crinkled ox eyes. Dear to him was the perfume of the bean field at evening, and dear to him the odorous ear spikenard that grew on the Syrian hills, and the fresh green thyme, the wine cup's charm, the feet of his love as she walked in the garden were like lilies set upon lilies. Softer than sleep-laden poppy petals were her lips, softer than violets and as scented. The flame-like crocus sprang from the grass to look at her. For her the slim narcissus stored the cool rain, and for her the anemones forgot the Sicilian winds that wooed them. And neither crocus nor anemone nor narcissus was as fair as she was. It is a strange thing, this transference of emotion. We sicken with the same maladies as the poets, and the singer lends us his pain. Dead lips have their message for us, and hearts that have fallen to dust can communicate their joy. We run to kiss the bleeding mouth of Fantine, and we follow Manon Lescaut over the whole world. Ours is the love madness of the Tyrian, and the terror of Orestes is ours also. There is no passion that we cannot feel, no pleasure that we may not gratify, and we can choose the time of our initiation and the time of our freedom also. Life, life. Don't let us go to life for our fulfillment or our experience. It is a thing narrowed by circumstances, incoherent in its utterance, and without that fine correspondence of form and spirit, which is the only thing that can satisfy the artistic and critical temperament. It makes us pay too high a price for its wares, and we purchase the meanest of its secrets at a cost that is monstrous and infinite. Ernest. Must we go then to art for everything? Gilbert. For everything. Because art does not hurt us. The tears that we shed at a play are a type of the exquisite sterile emotions that it is the function of art to awaken. We weep, but we are not wounded. We grieve, but our grief is not bitter. In the actual life of man, sorrow, as Spinoza says somewhere, is a passage to a lesser perfection. But the sorrow with which art fills us both purifies and initiates, if I may quote once more from the great art critic of the Greeks. It is through art, and through art only, that we can realize our perfection. Through art, and through art only, that we can shield ourselves from the sordid perils of actual existence. This results not merely from the fact that nothing that one can imagine is worth doing, and that one can imagine everything, but from the subtle law that emotional forces, like the forces of the physical sphere, are limited in extent and energy. One can feel so much and no more. And how can it matter with what pleasure life tries to tempt one, or with what pain it seeks to maim and mar one's soul, if in the spectacle of the lives of those who have never existed, one has found the true secret of joy, and wept away one's tears over the deaths, who like Cordelia and the daughter of Brabantio can never die? Ernest. Stop a moment. It seems to me that in everything that you have said, there is something radically immoral. Gilbert. All art is immoral. Ernest. All art? Gilbert. Yes, for emotion for the sake of emotion is the aim of art, and emotion for the sake of action is the aim of life, and of that practical organization of life that we call society. Society, which is the beginning and basis of morals, exists simply for the concentration of human energy, and in order to ensure its own continuance and healthy stability, it demands, and no doubt rightly demands, of each of its citizens that he should contribute some form of productive labor to the common weal, and toil and travail that the day's work may be done. Society often forgives the criminal. It never forgives the dreamer. The beautiful, sterile emotions that art excites in us are hateful in its eyes, and so completely are people dominated by the tyranny of this dreadful social ideal that they are always coming shamelessly up to one at private views and other places that are open to the general public, and saying in a loud stentorian voice, "What are you doing?" Whereas, "What are you thinking?" is the only question that any single civilized being should ever be allowed to whisper to another. They mean well, no doubt, these honest, beaming folk. Perhaps that is the reason why they are so excessively tedious. But someone should teach them that while, in the opinion of society, contemplation is the gravest sin of which any citizen can be guilty, In the opinion of the highest culture, it is the proper occupation of man. Ernest. Contemplation? Gilbert. Contemplation. I said to you some time ago that it was far more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it. Let me say to you now that to do nothing at all is the most difficult thing in the world, the most difficult and the most intellectual. To Plato, with his passion for wisdom, this was the noblest form of energy. To Aristotle, with his passion for knowledge, this was the noblest form of energy also. It was to this that the passion for holiness led the saint and the mystic of medieval days. Ernest. We exist, then, to do nothing? Gilbert. It is to do nothing that the elect exist. Action is limited and relative. Unlimited and absolute is the vision of him who sits at case and watches, who walks in loneliness and dreams. But we who are born at the close of this wonderful age are at once too cultured and too critical, too intellectually subtle and too curious of exquisite pleasures to accept any speculations about life in exchange for life itself. To us the Città Divina is colorless, and the Frutio Dei without meaning. Metaphysics do not satisfy our temperaments, and religious ecstasy is out of date. The world through which the academic philosopher becomes the spectator of all time and of all existence is not really an ideal world, but simply a world of abstract ideas. When we enter it, we starve amidst the chill mathematics of thought. The courts of the city of God are not open to us now. Its gates are guarded by ignorance, and to pass them we have to surrender all that in our nature is most divine. It is enough that our fathers believed. They have exhausted the faith faculty of the species. Their legacy to us is the skepticism of which they were afraid. Had they put it into words, it might not live within us as thought. No, Ernest, no, we cannot go back to the saint. There is far more to be learned from the sinner. We cannot go back to the philosopher, and the mystic leads us astray. Who, as Mr. Pater suggests somewhere, would exchange the curve of a single rose leaf for that formless, intangible being which Plato rates so high? What to us is the illumination of Philo, the abyss of Eckhart, the vision of Bohm, the monstrous heaven itself that was revealed to Swedenborg's blind eyes? Such things are less than the yellow trumpet of one daffodil of the field, far less than the meanest of the visible arts. For just as nature is matter struggling into mind, so art is mind expressing itself under the conditions of matter, and thus, even in the lowliest of her manifestations, she speaks to both sense and soul alike. To the aesthetic temperament, the vague is always repellent. The Greeks were a nation of artists because they were spared the sense of the infinite. Like Aristotle, like Goethe after he had read Kant, we desire the concrete, and nothing but the concrete can satisfy us. Ernest. What then do you propose? Gilbert. It seems to me that with the development of the critical spirit, we shall be able to realize not merely our own lives, but the collective life of the race, and so to make ourselves absolutely modern, in the true meaning of the word modernity. For he to whom the present is the only thing that is present, knows nothing of the age in which he lives. To realize the 19th century, one must realize every century that has preceded it, and that has contributed to its making. To know anything about oneself, one must know all about others. There must be no mood with which one cannot sympathize, no dead mode of life that one cannot make alive. Is this impossible? I think not. By revealing to us the absolute mechanism of all action, and so freeing us from the self-imposed and trammeling burden of moral responsibility, the scientific principle of heredity has become, as it were, the warrant for the contemplative life. It has shown us that we are never less free than when we try to act. It has hemmed us round with the nets of the hunter, and written upon the wall the prophecy of our doom. We may not watch it, for it is within us. We may not see it, save in a mirror that mirrors the soul. It is Nemesis without her mask. It is the last of the fates, and the most terrible. It is the only one of the gods whose real name we know. And yet, while in the sphere of practical and external life it has robbed energy of its freedom and activity of its choice, in the subjective sphere, where the soul is at work, it comes to us, this terrible shadow with many gifts in its hands, gifts of strange temperaments and subtle susceptibilities, gifts of wild ardors and chill moods of indifference, complex, multiform gifts of thoughts that are at variance with each other, and passions that war against themselves. And so it is not our own life that we live, but the lives of the dead, and the soul that dwells within us is no single spiritual entity, making us personal and individual, created for our service and entering into us for our joy. It is something that has dwelt in fearful places and in ancient sepulchres, has made its abode. It is sick with many maladies, and has memories of curious sins. It is wiser than we are, and its wisdom is bitter. It fills us with impossible desires, and makes us follow what we know we cannot gain. One thing, however, Ernest, it can do for us. It can lead us away from the surroundings whose beauty is dimmed to us by the mist of familiarity, or whose ignoble ugliness and sordid claims are marring the perfection of our development. It can help us to leave the age in which we were born, and to pass into other ages, and find ourselves not exiled from their air. It can teach us how to escape from our experience, and to realize the experiences of those who are greater than we are. The pain of Leopardi crying out against life becomes our pain. Theocritus blows on his pipe, and we laugh with the lips of nymph and shepherd. In the wolfskin of Pierre Vidal we flee before the hounds, and in the armor of Lancelot we ride from the bower of the queen. We have whispered the secret of our love beneath the cowl of Abelard, and in the stained raiment of Villon we have put our shame into song. We can see the dawn through Shelley's eyes, and when we wander with Endymion, the moon grows amorous of our youth. Ours is the anguish of Attis, and ours the weak rage and noble sorrows of the Dane. Do you think that it is the imagination that enables us to live these countless lives? Yes, it is the imagination, and the imagination is the result of heredity. It is simply concentrated race experience. Ernest. But where in this is the function of the critical spirit? Gilbert. The culture that this transmission of racial experiences makes possible can be made perfect by the critical spirit alone, and indeed may be said to be one with it. For who is the true critic but he who bears within himself the dreams and ideas and feelings of myriad generations, and to whom no form of thought is alien, no emotional impulse obscure? And who the true man of culture, if not he who by fine scholarship and fastidious rejection has made instinct self-conscious and intelligent, and can separate the work that has distinction from the work that has it not, and so by contact and comparison makes himself master of the secrets of style and school, and understands their meanings, and listens to their voices, and develops that spirit of disinterested curiosity, which is the real root, as it is the real flower of the intellectual life, and thus attains to intellectual clarity, and having learned the best that is known and thought in the world, lives, if it is not fanciful to say so, with those who are the immortals. Yes, Ernest, the contemplative life, the life that has for its aim not doing, but being, and not being merely, but becoming, that is what the critical spirit can give us. The gods live thus, either brooding over their own perfection, as Aristotle tells us, or, as Epicurus fancied, watching with the calm eyes of the spectator the tragicomedy of the world that they have made. We, too, might live like them, and set ourselves to witness with appropriate emotions the varied scenes that man and nature afford. We might make ourselves spiritual by detaching ourselves from action, and become perfect by the rejection of energy. It has often seemed to me that Browning felt something of this. Shakespeare hurls Hamlet into active life, and makes him realize his mission by effort. Browning might have given us a Hamlet who would have realized his mission by thought. Incident and event were to him unreal or unmeaning. He made the soul the protagonist of life's tragedy, and looked on action as the one undramatic element of a play. To us, at any rate, the contemplative life is the true ideal. From the high tower of thought, we can look out at the world. Calm and self-centered and complete, the aesthetic critic contemplates life, and no arrow drawn at a venture can pierce between the joints of his harness. He at least is safe. He has discovered how to live. Is such a mode of life immoral? Yes, all the arts are immoral, except those baser forms of sensual or didactic art that seek to excite to action of evil or of good. For action of every kind belongs to the sphere of ethics. The aim of art is simply to create a mood. Is such a mode of life unpractical? Ah, it is not so easy to be unpractical as the ignorant Philistine imagines. It were well for England if it were so. There is no country in the world so much in need of unpractical people as this country of ours. With us, thought is degraded by its constant association with practice. Who that moves in the stress and turmoil of the actual existence, noisy politician or brawling social reformer, or poor narrow-minded priest blinded by the sufferings of that unimportant section of the community among whom he casts his lot, can seriously claim to be able to form disinterested, intellectual judgment about any one thing? Each of the professions means a prejudice. The necessity for a career forces everyone to take sides. We live in the age of the overworked and the undereducated, the age in which people are so industrious that they become absolutely stupid. And, harsh though it may sound, I cannot help saying that such people deserve their doom. The sure way of knowing nothing about life is to try to make oneself useful. Ernest. A charming doctrine, Gilbert. Gilbert. I am not sure about that, but it has at least the minor merit of being true. That the desire to do good to others produces a plentiful crop of prigs is the least of the evils of which it is the cause. The prig is a very interesting psychological study, and though of all poses a moral pose is the most offensive, still to have a pose at all is something. It is a formal recognition of the importance of treating life from a definite and reasoned standpoint. That humanitarian sympathy wars against nature, by securing the survival of the failure, may make the man of science loathe its facile virtues. The political economist may cry out against it for putting the improvident on the same level as the provident, and so robbing life of the strongest, because most sordid, incentive to industry. But in the eyes of the thinker, the real harm that emotional sympathy does is that it limits knowledge, and so prevents us from solving any single social problem. We are trying at present to stave off the coming crisis, the coming revolution as my friends the Fabianists call it, by means of doles and alms. Well, when the revolution or crisis arrives, we shall be powerless, because we shall know nothing. And so, Ernest, let us not be deceived. England will never be civilized till she has added utopia to her dominions. There is more than one of her colonies that she might with advantage surrender for so fair a land. What we want are unpractical people, who see beyond the moment and think beyond the day. Those who try to lead the people can only do so by following the mob. It is through the voice of one crying in the wilderness that the ways of the gods must be prepared. But perhaps you think that in beholding for the mere joy of beholding, and contemplating for the sake of contemplation, there is something that is egoistic. If you think so, do not say so. It takes a thoroughly selfish age like our own to deify self-sacrifice. It takes a thoroughly grasping age, such as that in which we live, to set above the fine intellectual virtues those shallow and emotional virtues that are an immediate practical benefit to itself. They miss their aim, too, these philanthropists and sentimentalists of our day, who are always chattering to one about one's duty to one's neighbor. For the development of the race depends on the development of the individual, and where self-culture has ceased to be the ideal, the intellectual standard is instantly lowered, and often ultimately lost. If you meet at dinner a man who has spent his life in educating himself, a rare type in our time, I admit, but still one occasionally to be met with, you rise from table richer, and conscious that a high ideal has for a moment touched and sanctified your days. But oh, my dear Ernest, to sit next to a man who has spent his life trying to educate others, what a dreadful experience that is. How appalling is that ignorance which is the inevitable result of the fatal habit of imparting opinions. How limited in range the creature's mind proves to be. How it wearies us, and must weary himself with its endless repetitions and sickly reiteration. How lacking it is in any element of intellectual growth. In what a vicious circle it always moves. Ernest. You speak with strange feeling, Gilbert. Have you had this dreadful experience, as you call it, lately? Gilbert. Few of us escape it. People say that the schoolmaster is abroad. I wish to goodness he were. But the type of which, after all, he is only one, and certainly the least important of the representatives, seems to me to be really dominating our lives. And just as the philanthropist is the nuisance of the ethical sphere, so the nuisance of the intellectual sphere is the man who is so occupied in trying to educate others that he has never had any time to educate himself. No, Ernest, self-culture is the true ideal of man. Goethe saw it, and the immediate debt that we owe to Goethe is greater than the debt we owe to any man since Greek days. The Greeks saw it, and have left us, as their legacy to modern thought, the conception of the contemplative life as well as the critical method by which alone can that life be truly realized. It was the one thing that made the Renaissance great, and gave us humanism. It is the one thing that could make our own age great also. For the real weakness of England lies not in incomplete armaments or unfortified coasts, not in the poverty that creeps through sunless lanes or the drunkenness that brawls in loathsome courts, but simply in the fact that her ideals are emotional and not intellectual. I do not deny that the intellectual ideal is difficult of attainment, still less that it is, and perhaps will be for years to come, unpopular with the crowd. It is so easy for people to have a sympathy with suffering. It is so difficult for them to have sympathy with thought. Indeed, so little do ordinary people understand what thought really is, that they seem to imagine that, when they have said that a theory is dangerous, they have pronounced its condemnation, whereas it is only such theories that have any true intellectual value. An idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. Ernest. Gilbert, you bewilder me. You have told me that all art is, in its essence, immoral. Are you going to tell me now that all thought is, in its essence, dangerous? Gilbert. Yes, in the practical sphere it is so. The security of society lies in custom and unconscious instinct, and the basis of the stability of society, as a healthy organism, is the complete absence of any intelligence amongst its members. The great majority of people, being fully aware of this, rank themselves naturally on the side of that splendid system that elevates them to the dignity of machines, and rage so wildly against the intrusion of the intellectual faculty into any question that concerns life, that one is tempted to define man as a rational animal who always loses his temper when he is called upon to act in accordance with the dictates of reason. But let us turn from the practical sphere, and say no more about the wicked philanthropists, who indeed may well be left to the mercy of the almond-eyed sage of the Yellow River, Chuang Tzu the Wise, who has proved that such well-meaning and offensive busybodies have destroyed the simple and spontaneous virtue that there is in man. They are a wearisome topic, and I am anxious to get back to the sphere in which criticism is free. Ernest. The sphere of the intellect? Gilbert. Yes. You remember that I spoke of the critic as being in his own way as creative as the artist, whose work indeed may be merely of value insofar as it gives the critic a suggestion for some new mood of thought and feeling which he can realize with equal or perhaps greater distinction of form, and through the use of a fresh medium of expression, make differently beautiful and more perfect. Well, you seem to be a little skeptical about the theory, but perhaps I wronged you. Ernest. I am not really skeptical about it, but I must admit that I feel very strongly that such work as you describe the critic producing, and creative such work must undoubtedly be admitted to be, is of necessity purely subjective, whereas the greatest work is objective always, objective and impersonal. Gilbert. The difference between objective and subjective work is one of external form merely. It is accidental, not essential. All artistic creation is absolutely subjective. The very landscape that Corot looked at was, as he said himself, but a mood of his own mind. And those great figures of Greek or English drama that seem to us to possess an actual existence of their own, apart from the poets who shaped and fashioned them, are, in their ultimate analysis, simply the poets themselves, not as they thought they were, but as they thought they were not. And by such thinking came in strange manner, though but for a moment really so to be. For out of ourselves we can never pass, nor can there be in creation what in the Creator was not. Nay, I would say that the more objective a creation appears to be, the more subjective it really is. Shakespeare might have met Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in the white streets of London, or seen the serving men of rival houses bite their thumbs at each other in the open square. But Hamlet came out of his soul, and Romeo out of his passion. They were elements of his nature to which he gave visible form, impulses that stirred so strongly within him that he had, as it were, perforce, to suffer them to realize their energy, not on the lower plane of actual life, where they would have been trammeled and constrained and so made imperfect, but on that imaginative plane of art where love can indeed find in death its rich fulfillment, where one can stab the eavesdropper behind the arras, and wrestle in a new-made grave, and make a guilty king drink his own hurt, and see one's father's spirit, beneath the glimpses of the moon, stalking in complete steel from misty wall to wall. Action being limited would have left Shakespeare unsatisfied and unexpressed. And just as it is because he did nothing that he has been able to achieve everything, so it is because he never speaks to us of himself in his plays that his plays reveal him to us absolutely, and show us his true nature and temperament far more completely than those strange and exquisite sonnets, even in which he bears to crystal eyes the secret closet of his heart. Yes, the objective form is most subjective in matter. Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask, and he will tell you the truth. This is the end of Section 1 of the second dialogue of The Critic as Artist by Oscar Wilde. Thank you for listening.